All right, let's get started with Python and with PyCharm EDU, which is otherwise known as PyCharm Community Edition. So what are we going to cover in this lecture? We're going to look at how we enter a sample and simple program, which in PyCharm EDU, PyCharm Community Edition, is called a project. Then we will enter a more complex program as another project. We'll learn how to detect and fix mistakes that we might have made. We'll have a look at the file structure of a PyCharm EDU project. And finally, how we would zip a project for submission. And we'll actually look at how to zip a couple of projects together as if they were an assignment. So, let's get started. In our first problem, we're going to be doing something that is traditional. In computer science, it's almost universal that we create a Hello World program as our first effort. PyCharm, which that's all we're going to call it from now on, can create a default project for you and put code in it, but we're going to solve it without that benefit. We'll tell PyCharm not to create the default project with code in it. We'll just create the project structure, and we'll add our own code. You want your project to print these words in the console output. Hello, comma, space, world, exclamation point. Note the capital at the beginning. We're going to make it look exactly like that. So we're going to switch over now to PyCharm and see how we would create that project and then add a code item to it to solve the defined problem. Let's go. The first thing we need to do, of course, is start PyCharm. So I'm going to use my tool that I have here on a Mac to search for it. Of course, you have the same thing in the lower left on Windows, PyCharm CE. So I'm going to run that. And it's going to run PyCharm Community Edition. And now I can create a project that we'll use to solve our problem. So if we look here, I have users, Vessey, PyCharm projects, and it calls it Python project. Okay? So I'm going to tell it that I want to call this project Hello World. Okay? And I'm going to tell it to put this information. There's going to be another directory called Hello World that has the virtual environment for it. Yours may look a bit different. Don't worry about it, okay? That will work just fine. It's going to make a new virtual environment for that. And make sure this is not checked. Create a main.py welcome script, because we don't want that default code. We don't need it for what we're going to do. So I'm going to tell it to go ahead and create. And it takes a few seconds to create the virtual environment and build it. So now we can see in this window that our PyCharm project is there. Okay, tips. If that pops up, you can turn it off or you can read them. It doesn't matter, but we don't need them for this. I'm going to double click on a Mac. That makes it full screen. You can do the same thing. You can full screen your windows. This is the project itself, the project folder, but there's nothing in it yet. Okay, so it's opened up, but there's nothing in it. I'm going to right click on the project. I'm going to pick new, and I'm going to make a new Python file. This is how you're going to create Python code. And it now says, okay, you're making a Python file. There's also Python unit test and Python stub. Don't worry about those right now. That's way later in our development careers. But I'm going to call my code Hello World. It's going to automatically put .py at the end. I don't need to specify that. The IDE, the Integrated Development Environment, takes care of that for me. So when I hit enter, you can see it has created helloworld.py. It's named here, and it shows it in the project file structure. And now I can begin typing Python code. So we need to print out the message Hello World. To do that in Python, we use the print statement. Okay. It's going to give us help to tell us how print works, but we're going to ignore that for now because I'm going to show you what to use. We're going to print, and we're going to put double quotes in. You can use either double quotes or single quotes around text that you want to be displayed exactly. We call that a string literal. But I'm going to use the double quotes. And I'm going to type in the message, hello world, with an exclamation point at the end. That's all there is to it. That will print hello world on our screen. Now I can go and I can tell it to run this code over here. This little green forward button tells us to run. When you run it, it saves the file for you and then executes it. And down here, you can see the run output for hello world. Okay, so there it is. So it ran using a Python interpreter, okay, my hello world.py code, which printed hello, comma, space, world, exclamation point. And then it says process finished with exit code 0. What does that mean? That means it's all good. An exit code of 0 universally in every computer system means nothing went wrong. A non-zero exit code indicates something went wrong, and it's possible for another program that might be using this program to then interpret that. But we don't need to worry about it. It will finish with exit code 0 if it was able to execute properly. Well, that's all there is to a simple Python program. In a few minutes, we're going to look at a more complex version. Stay tuned. All right, well, we got along fairly well with that, I think. So let's move on to problem 2. Create a program that prints the following information. Your name in international format. International format has the last name in all caps, but your personal name, your first name, is in upper and lower case. Now, if you are coming from an Asian country, you might have the custom of putting your family name first and your first name second, and that's just fine. Just make sure your family name is in all caps. That way, other people will look and go, ah, okay, I understand your name. Then we're going to list your birthplace, then your age, and finally your favorite ice cream flavor. Now, I realize some of this is personal information, and we're not going to ask you to submit it or send it anywhere, so you're not actually going to be exposing your information to anyone. So you don't need to worry about that. Again, we're going to tell PyCharm not to create that default project with code included. We're going to turn that option off and just make a project that has no code in it. We'll write all of our own. Here's the example output for me. Name, Chris Vessey. Vessey is my family name. My wife shares the same last name as I have, and my parents had that same last name. Chris is short for Christopher, which is my first name. My birthplace, Abu Dhabi. I'm not joking. I was actually born in Abu Dhabi. So that's kind of an interesting side fact. My age, 54. And my favorite ice cream, salted caramel. Delicious. So you're going to put your name, your birthplace, your age, and your favorite ice cream flavor. Now, I realize it's possible that you might not be able to eat ice cream. Maybe you are intolerant to milk products. Just make one up. It doesn't matter. So we're going to do this in PyCharm. But note that normally on an assignment, if you have more than one problem to complete, each problem is going to be a separate project. So we're going to do that here as well. We're going to create a separate project from our first problem. While it might seem easy to put multiple programs into a single project, later on in CS1920, that's not going to work for us because of the way that projects are built and the fact that we're going to be doing things progressively. So you may as well get in the habit now. You'll thank us for it later. We're now ready to solve the second problem that you were given. In this problem, you have to print out several lines of information. Let's see how that's done. Now you'll notice in PyCharm when we start it up, Hello World is in your list of projects. PyCharm keeps a list of all the things you've done. Now it is possible to remove them from there if you get too many of them, but for now we're going to leave that there. If you were working on an assignment, you would want at the very least all of the pieces of the assignment to be here so you can easily go back and check them and possibly modify them if you need to. So I'm going to make a new project. This is just like before. Again, not Python project. Okay? We're going to call this one Personal Preferences. Okay? And I'm going to tell it to go ahead and create that project. I'm going to make this into a full screen. And just like before, I am going to add in a new Python file. This one, to keep it a little shorter, I'll just call it personal prefs. At this stage of the game, the actual name of the program file isn't that important, but you've probably noticed that we normally start it with a letter. We haven't used numbers in them yet, but you are allowed to do that. But we typically don't put spaces in a file name. Okay, so file names will look a bit like this. So the problem says that we need to print out the person's name, the person's birthplace, the person's age, and their favorite ice cream flavor. That's 4 things. So I can put in statements to do that. Okay, so I can type my print statement, just like I had before. Then I can say name. I put 2 spaces, that's me. And it's in international format. So my first name, that's the short form of my first name that I usually use, and my family name. Then I can go to a second line. I move to the end and hit enter, and I start a new line. On the second line, I can print my birthplace. Now, just for fun, I'm going to put my birthplace out here. Okay? You can already tell something's wrong because it's underlined it in red, but we're going to leave that for a second. The next line, I'm going to tell it to print my age. And on the last line, I'm going to tell it to print my favorite ice cream flavor. Okay? So I'm just going to put in favorite. Notice that I spell it the Canadian way, O-U-R. Ice cream. And then I'm going to put in salted caramel, because that is my favorite flavor. Okay? So we have 4 lines of code. We can ignore the light bulb. That's a hint, okay? But we don't need to worry about that right now. And it tells we could change it to a single quoted string. Sure, let's do that. Okay? All it did there was it just replaced the double quotes with single quotes. Some Python programmers prefer that. Let's try to run this program. There's a problem. If we look down here, and I'll scroll it back just a little bit, it tries to run the program like before. So it tries to run it with the Python interpreter, and it tries to run personalprefs.py. But then it says, in the file personalprefs.py, this is all path information that tells you where to find it. On line 2, there's a problem. Syntax error. Syntax means rules of the language. Invalid syntax. Perhaps you forgot a comma? Well, that's not actually the reason. It's I put stuff outside of the double quotes. But notice down here, process finished with exit code 1. That's not 0, so that means there was a problem. It means the program couldn't run. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this text that's here, I am going to cut it, and I'm going to paste it inside the quotes. Notice how the color changed. It's now green like the rest of the text. That's one of the nice things about PyCharm, is that it colors things to tell you what they mean. These are all string literals. Even if they only have single quotes, they're still string literals. Print is a recognized keyword. It's an internal function call, okay, called a built-in. Now, when you hover over things, you're going to get all kinds of extra information. Don't panic, okay? Just leave that alone for now, because the reasons for that stuff are more complex than we can currently figure out, but we will know about it eventually. Now let's try to run the code. It resaves it and reruns it, and there it is. It's got my name, my birthplace, my age, and my favorite ice cream. I used 4 separate print statements to do this. Could I have done it without using 4 separate print statements? The answer is yes. You will learn that there is a special character that means start a new line now. Notice how it lights up a special color. That's called an escaped character. So it's calling our attention to that. I'm going to then take the text that was in this print statement, cut it. I'm using, on my keyboard on a Mac, Command X, on a Windows machine, or on a Linux machine, Control X would do the same thing. And I'm going to use Command V, which would be Control V, okay, on other systems, to paste it in place. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to put in a new line character. It's inside the double quotes. So it's part of the string, but it's special. Okay, again, cut, paste. We normally don't make lines this long, but we're just proving a point here. And one more new line. And we're going to cut and paste. Now, something to think about. Previously, I had no new line characters, but all of these things appeared on their own lines. That's because, by default, print prints what you give it and then starts a new line. Here, this will print this and start a new line, this and start a new line, this and start a new line, then this, and then it will start a new line, because that's what print does. So we don't need one on the last item. Now I'm just going to take all of this extra print statements that aren't needed and delete them. Watch what's going to happen now. I'm actually going to close the run window for this so that you're absolutely certain it's a brand new run. Watch what happens now when I run this. I get the same output. So the backslash allows you to print multiple lines in one line. But we normally want to avoid doing a great big line like this because great big lines are hard to read. But we just want you to be aware of that. Okay, that's it for this first lecture in terms of demonstrations. Now you're going to have a take-home problem that you'll be able to play with on your own. And finally, here's a take-home problem for you to do on your own. You're going to create a program that prints the following information. I have a dog, and his name is Spot. He is sometimes white, and he is sometimes not. But whether he's white or whether he's not, I am glad that he's my dog Spot. When I was in grade school, this was a song that we had to sing in a music festival. Now, a challenge. Can you find a way to do this with only one print statement? You're going to want to look at your documentation and find out, is there a way to do that? Again, tell PyCharm not to create the default project with code in it. Just create an empty project and you will add your own code. There's no solution code for this. You're just going to do this on your own, and hopefully you can get that output. Now, if you can do it with 4 print statements, great. But if you can do it with only one, well, you deserve an extra trip to the refrigerator for more dessert. That's it for this set of lessons, and we'll go on to the next lecture in a little bit. Let's have a look now and see how we find where our Python projects are being stored by default. So I'm using a Mac, but again, if you're using a Windows machine, you're going to be looking at C:/. Well, this is kind of a view where this is the equivalent to the C drive. So when I open that up, I notice that I have some folders, and you will too. One of them will be called users. That's the same on Windows and on Mac. And then in here are a list of users that are on my system. Okay, and I'm Vessey, so I will pick that. And there's all the junk that I have. But what you're looking for is down here. Okay, PyCharm projects. And when you look in PyCharm projects, you then see things like Hello World, and you can see its Python code. Or when we had the personal preferences, you can see the Python code. Now, if these were parts of an assignment, say this was the first question and this was the second question, what I can do is I can select both of these. The easiest way for me to do that on a Mac is to select one and then hold down my Command key and select the other. Okay? You're going to use a different key on Windows, or you're going to do a stretch area, like I'm clicking and dragging here, to select both of those folders within PyCharm projects. From there, on a Mac, I right-click and I choose Compress. You would choose Send to compressed/zipped folder if you were using a Windows machine. There is a whole other video that talks about how to do that. When I do that action, I end up with this, archive.zip. Yours will use one of the two names, and you can rename it afterwards. I'm going to rename mine. One click on it in a Mac lets me rename. Okay, and I might put in AS1_CVessey, for example. And I've created that zip file. Now, if I wanted to get rid of these projects altogether from the disk, I would simply delete these folders, but I would also remove them from within PyCharm. Okay? So this is how we get into the contents of PyCharm projects, and this is how we create zip folders of those things. Well, that concludes the information for Lecture 1. Now, we're going to move ahead with information in Lecture 2 for this week. If this were an actual lecture with your instructor, of course, the pace would be different. There would be chance for questions, which you can't ask a video, and there could be a few more examples for you to work through in class. But I think this will give you the idea of how we will work through some examples together, but there will be some takeaways that you can take home and do on your own. We'll see you again in Lecture 2.